Welcome to AllenStreet Online. You know what, I'm sitting here actually in my home. If you were with us last week, I mentioned my wife and I got away. We were going out, we had an RV trip that we were planning, and can I just tell you, not everything goes as you plan. You might call our time a lesson in Murphy's Law, but the thing that we took away from it is this: you get to choose how to respond. And while we had all these things go wrong, we made the best of it, and we had an incredible time together. And I want you to know, God was there with us, just like even today, He'll be there with you, regardless of what you're going through. Right now, if you're watching on one of the social media platforms, let me encourage you to jump over to our website. The reason is this: we have all of our next steps, all of the tools that you would need to be able to request information or to secure a book or an outline or to submit a prayer request. You may also submit prayer requests by texting the word prayer to 660-885-2127. And you can do that anytime, 24/7. Right now, would you text the word connect to that same phone number? You're going to receive back a response, and if you'll click on it, you'll get a digital copy of our connection card. It's a way that we can know that you're here with us, and you can also submit prayer requests, follow along with next steps, even request information. And finally, you can also give by texting the word give to the phone number. Well, I'm glad you're here with us watching our service. We're going to encourage you. We're going to worship for a couple of moments. Feel free to sing along right where you are, or maybe you just want to sit back and relax and enjoy it. Pastor David is going to be preaching. He's actually going to be sharing about the prodigal father and what we can learn from a father who loves regardless. Somebody needs that today, to be reminded that our God loves us regardless of what we've been through. And maybe you're sitting there thinking you've gone too far, that God could never do something with you. I want you to know you're here for a good day, because you're going to find out God is waiting with His arms open wide, ready to receive you and kiss you and get you back into His family. Sit back and enjoy as we worship.
What There's a table that you've prepared for me in the presence of my enemies. It's your body and your blood you shed for me. This is how I fight my battles. There's a table that you prepared for me in the presence of my enemies. It's your body and your blood you shed for me. This is how I fight my battles. And I believe you've overcome, and I will lift my song of praise for all you've done. This is how I fight my battles. 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 This is how. In the valley, I know that you're with me, and surely your goodness and your mercy follow me. So my weapons of praise and thanksgiving. This is how I fight my battles. And I believe you've overcome, and I will lift my song of praise for all you've done. This is how I fight my battles. This is how I fight my battles. This is how I fight my battles. This is how. This is how I fight my battles. This is how I fight my battles. This is how I fight my battles. This is how. Maybe right now you're asking yourself, how do I fight my battles? You know, this song reminds us that we're supposed to fight our battles with praise and thanksgiving, knowing that the Lord is fighting for us every step of the way. And maybe you're in the darkest part, the deepest dark of night, and you're wondering how you get out. You can do that by lifting your voice of praise, lifting your hands in praise. Maybe you're going to lift your hands for the first time. Lift them and surrender to God. Let Him work on your behalf. Let Him fight for you. He wants to. He wants to be there right with you if you allow Him to. It may look like I'm surrounded. It may look like I'm surrounded, but I'm surrounded by you. Hear that wherever you are. It may look like I'm surrounded, but I'm surrounded by you. It may look like I'm surrounded, but I'm surrounded by you. It may look like I'm surrounded, but I'm surrounded by you. Oh, it may look like
we're glad to have you back with us. Last week, we talked about lost sheep. We talked about lost coins. We talked about being fully committed. We talked about being lost. We have those who are fully committed to God. We have those who are lost and are not serving God at all. But today, we're talking about the prodigal son. So, according to the American Heritage Dictionary, prodigal means recklessly wasteful or extravagant. It's a person who spends money in a recklessly extravagant way. It's a person who leaves home and behaves recklessly, but later makes a repentant return. The story of the prodigal son is the story of a son who is recklessly wasteful. He convinced his father to give him his inheritance early. He squandered on all fast living before coming home. So we're going back to Luke chapter 15, starting at verse 11, and it says, there was a man who had 2 sons. This story can tell you more about God than you can ever imagine. This story is one of the most important stories in the entire Bible because it's the story of what God is like. If you want to know how God feels about you, if you want to know how much you're worth in God's eyes, or if you've ever wondered if you have any significance in this vast universe, then this is the story for you. How does God feel about you? We tend to think that once we have messed up, God is through with us. That's not true. God takes us regardless of what we have done in our life. This is the third story that Jesus tells in response to some muttering that the Pharisees were doing because Jesus was hanging out with the riffraff of Israel. The Pharisees didn't like that Jesus was associating with the so-called outcast. However, this muttering and this whispering did not sit well with Jesus. So he turns to them. He tells them about a shepherd who loses a sheep and a woman who loses a coin. And then he tells them about a father who had 2 sons and lost one. The story of the prodigal son that we're looking at today is told in 4 different scenes. On to scene 1, the son asks for his inheritance. The younger son asks the father to divide his property between him and his brother so he can have his inheritance now. And kind of amazingly, the father does. It ended up being split 1/3 versus 2/3. 1/3 to the younger son and 2/3 to the older son. At first glance, you might think, well, that's a really cool dad. Or without many boundaries, who is just putty in his children's hands. You might be right on both counts, but you miss the point of what really happens in this scene because what Jesus was actually describing here would be scandalous to every person who heard it. No one in the Middle East would ever make such a request of their father because to ask for their inheritance early would be like expressing a death wish for the father. Author Ken Bailey, who lived in the Middle East for quite some time, wrote this. For over 15 years, I've been asking people of all walks of life about the implications of a son's request for his inheritance while the father is still living. The answer has almost always been the same. Has anyone ever made such a request in your village? Well, never. Could anyone ever make such a request? Impossible. Well, if anybody did, what would happen? Well, his father would beat him, of course. Well, why? Because this request means that he wishes his father was dead. The younger brother is saying to his father, I want my 1/3 now, and my brother can have his 2/3 right now. In Luke 15:12, it says, divide your inheritance so I can have my share of the estate. This is the request. And to everyone's amazement, the father does. A story I heard. A couple had been fighting over the purchase of a new car for weeks. He wanted a new truck. She wanted a fast sports car. Excuse me. The discussion was getting very heated, and when finally the wife stated, look, I want something that goes from 0 to 180 in 4 seconds or less, and that's all there is to it. My birthday's coming up, and you better surprise me, or it's going to get mighty lonely for us around here, if you know what I mean. When her big day came, the wife went out to the garage, but there was no new car. Angry, she went back in the house, looking for her husband, but he was not at home. Frustrated and upset, she went to the bathroom to get dressed, and there, sitting on the floor, wrapped in a big red ribbon, was her birthday present, something that would go from 0 to 180 in 4 seconds or less, a brand new bathroom scale. But you know, just like the woman demanding a sports car and the younger brother demanding his inheritance, you have to watch the bands because you never know what you might get from them. Luke 15:13 says, not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth on wild living. Most people think he took off so quickly because he's just a party animal. Plain and simple, he couldn't be in the same town with this conservative old man because that just cramped his style. But that's not his motivation for leaving at all. Notice that he didn't leave immediately. It says, not long after that. In Luke 15:13, it says, not long after that, the younger brother got together all he had. Why did he have to wait a while? Because he had to liquidate his inheritance. He had to find a buyer for his portion of the family farm. He had to find a buyer for his portion of the family jewels. He had to find a buyer for his portion of the family stock. He had to find a buyer for all those things. And the only people that he could sell them to were people that were living in that village. So as Jesus was telling this story, his listeners were imagining this disrespectful young man going from door to door, trying to convince people who knew his father to buy a piece of the family property. All those folks knew that this boy had insulted his father, shamed him, and wished him dead. And now he was doing the unthinkable, selling off property and possessions that had been in the family for generations. At every turn, he's greeted with hostility and rejection. The family's estate is a significant part of a Middle Easterner's personal identity. By now, the villagers are openly hostile to him. There's been talk about shunning or publicly shaming him, taking some action to put this young, disrespectful snob in his place. The son feels more and more pressure to get out of town, so he leaves as soon as he has sold the last of his goods. On to scene 2. The son goes away to a faraway country. The son leaves town and heads for the faraway country, which is where this next part takes place. Luke 15 tells us he squandered his wealth in wild living. He wasted it. He wasted his inheritance. And the citizens of this faraway country know that. They're unimpressed with this foolish young man who is now out of money. And after all, what can you do for them now with no money? The polite way that a Middle Easterner gets rid of unwanted so-called hangers-on isn't to come right out and tell them to go home. It's to assign them a task they'll refuse to do. So they thought they would try that. So when the son asks for a job, one of the citizens offers to let him become his pig herder. First off, it's a job no self-respecting Jewish boy could accept. Second, pigs were unclean animals according to the law of Moses. And third, they had to be fed 7 times a week, which meant he couldn't keep the Sabbath. But to everyone's surprise, he accepts the job. But it's a terrible job, and it doesn't pay enough to even keep him from being hungry. So he's down in his hole of self-pity. He begins to think honestly about himself. He knows there is no life for him in this foreign land, yet he can't go home to his father because he's a failure. He has nothing to offer his father. Middle Eastern sons are supposed to provide for their fathers in their old age, not live off them. So he comes up with a plan. First off, he'll go home. Second, he'll admit he was a fool. And instead of asking to be reinstated as a son, third, he'll ask to be hired as a servant. This plan has merit, except for one thing. Even as his father accepts him on these terms, he'll have to face the meanness and the hostility of the villagers. This guy has not only not succeeded, but he's a miserable failure. So on to scene 3. The son goes back home. Younger son returns. This is where the father comes into the story in full force. The father knows these two things. First, he knows that the son is bound to fail. He knows that if the son ever does come home, it will probably not be as a successful businessman, but more likely as a beggar. And the second thing the father knows is that the village will not treat his son well. He knows that if the son ever does return, the first person who sees him will quickly pass the word that this outcast has come home, and a crowd will gather and likely begin to mock and spit and may just plain beat him. He knows that the son, in order to get home, will have to endure the meanness of the crowd with every step he takes to the village. The father knows this. What the father does to counteract all these things is absolutely short of amazing. The father does 5 things that would all be considered uncommon in Middle Eastern society. They're all designed to protect and restore his son that he loves so much. His son who turned away from him, rejected him, and wished him dead. And the first thing, number 1, that he does is he runs. The first thing the father does is he runs. When the word comes to him that his son has been seen on the outskirts of the village, the father runs to him. Can you see why this is so significant? Instead of letting his son run the ordeal, the father runs the ordeal for him. It's a crazy thing he does because a nobleman with flowing robes never runs anywhere. But this father lifts his robe, exposes his ankles, and runs down the road through the village in front of all the villagers. He humiliates himself instead of allowing his son to be humiliated. Luke 15:20 says, "But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him." The father's perspective is he was filled with compassion for his son. That's how God feels about his children. That's how God feels about us. He has compassion for us. And the father deliberately runs to the village. He knows he's creating a spectacle. He knows what he's doing will attract a crowd. He knows they will talk about his humiliation in the village for the rest of his life. The son's perspective say he knows his father lives in the middle of town and that the town hates him. How's he going to get to his father without trouble? He knows there's no way he can get to the father without enduring scorn. But he has to get to the father in order to become a servant. At his first sighting on the outskirts of the village, word starts spreading. As he comes to the edge of the village, he expects to see rocks and jeers and angry faces. Instead, what he sees coming toward him are the ankles of his father. To his utter amazement, rather than experiencing the ruthless hostility that he deserves for what he's done, he finds a visible demonstration of the love of his father. The father runs, showing us a demonstration of God's love for us. The second thing the father does is he kisses his son. Luke 15:20 says he ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. Just picture it. I mean, they're embracing, they're eye to eye, they're shoulder to shoulder. The son had pictured himself coming home and humbling himself. First, he'd kiss his father's hand, then he'd kiss his father's feet. But the father won't let him. He pulls his arms around him and kisses him on both cheeks. The son can't bend. All the son can do is accept the love from his father. You know, several years ago, as I was being raised, my mom and dad raised us in a good Christian home. But I got to a point in my life that I did some really stupid things and things that we were always taught not to do. Things that sometimes I'll even share the fact that it's a wonder I came through those alive. But Mom and Dad, they were always right there for us. I remember walking in many times in the front door of the house, and Dad would be sitting there, and I'd trip over his feet, not knowing he was sitting there waiting for me to come in. But they always loved me. They always cared for me. They always wanted to make sure that I was safe. And I got to the point in my life after going through all this that I really believe God impressed upon me that I need to go talk to my mom and dad and ask them for forgiveness. So this has been a few years ago. I went to them and asked them for forgiveness. And you know, the amazing thing is that their reply was, we've already forgiven you. And just to know that my parents care for me that much. And I know that as parents, saying in this room, watching online, wherever, I know there are a lot of parents that care for their children that much and love them deeply. But I want you to picture yourself in this scene. You've wronged God, and you know it. You know you're needing to crouch down. You're needing to admit that you're wrong, and you need to make all sorts of promises and really mean it. You approach him. You've got your whole speech planned, only he doesn't even let you begin. The minute you approach him, he embraces you. That is one powerful picture, isn't it? Look back at what the son planned to do when he first saw his father. Luke 15:19, it says, I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of our hired men. To his plan, he admitted his guilt, and he asked to become a servant in his father's household. But this is what the actual speech come out to be in Luke 15:21. Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be your son. So what was missing from the speech? His request to become a servant. Why is it missing? I believe it's missing because he is so overwhelmed by his father's love. His plan was to earn his way back into his father's favor. He never intended to ask his father to accept him back just as he was. How can you do that? There's no earning our way back. Jesus accepts you and I just as we are, but we also need to be ready to change. How overwhelming is the love of Jesus Christ? The third thing that Father does is call for a robe to be put on his son. In Luke 15:22, it says, But the father said to his servants, Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. So who owns the best robe in the family? The father does. So the father and the son are still standing on the edge of the village, and the father wants the whole village to know that he has accepted his son. He sends the servants to get his own best robe so he can wear it as he walks home to the village. It's amazing, isn't it? Amazing how Jesus accepts you and I. Amazing how this father accepted his son back. The fourth thing the father does is call for a ring and a sandal. It says in Luke 15:22, put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. You know, the ring's probably going to be a signet ring. It's the ring that the father would use to sign all documents, which means the son is a trusted, empowered member of the family. And the sandals are a sign that he is a free man, he's not a servant. Servants didn't get shoes, they walked barefooted. Finally, the father says, bring the fatted calf. Luke 15:23, bring the fatted calf and kill it. Not the fatted goat or the fatted sheep or the chicken. Why a calf? Because the calf had enough meat to feed the whole village. You see what the father is doing? He is wanting and inviting the whole village to share his joy. He doesn't want the son only to be reconciled to him, but he wants them to be reconciled to the whole village. He wants everyone to have a relationship with the son. Wow, I look at that, and that had to be one celebration time. This is a story that no one could have anticipated at all. It's a rags to unbelievable riches story, only the riches aren't about money. They're about measuring your worth in God's eyes. You are worth a lot in God's eyes. Do you see what Jesus is doing with this story? He's communicating to every person who ever wanted to take a step toward God just how significant that we are to him. how God feels about us. God doesn't just wait for us, he runs to us. He doesn't just let us bear the shame of living our life, he bears it for us. He kisses us. He puts his robe on us. He puts his ring on our finger. He puts his sandals on our feet. And he kills the fatted calf to celebrate us and invites everyone else to celebrate us with him. Now on to scene 4, and the older son is no longer connected to his father. The older son hasn't left home, but if you read the story carefully, you'll discover that he too has left his father. As the scene opens, where is the older son? He's out working in the field. There are 2 mentions of the older son in the opening of the story. Luke 15:11 says, there was a man who had 2 sons. The younger said to his father, Father, give me my share of this estate. So he divided his property between them. The older son owns everything that he and his father now live on. It belongs to him. But as the older son is coming in from the fields, he hears music playing, and he gets a report from one of the servants that his brother has returned and that a party's going on. What was the older brother's response to this? He was angry. He refuses to join the party. That would be a severe insult to his father. Humiliated him a second time in front of the whole village because the older son's role at a party was to welcome all the guests. With him not at the party, everybody knows that he has rejected his father. The older boy says to his father, look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders, yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. So that scripture kind of tips us off that he has this distance between him and his father. First of all, he doesn't even think of himself as a son. He says he's been slaving for the father. Hasn't lived with him like a son, but like a servant. Second, he's mad because the father had never given him an animal to throw a party with his friends. The truly sad thing about the son, though, is that he felt deprived by the father because the father had never given him anything. No calf, no chicken, not even a goat. But what happened when the younger son left? The older son got his share of the inheritance too. And the father says, my son, you are always with me and everything I have is yours. The father's saying, I have already given it to you. All these years it has been yours. But the older son has distanced himself and he refuses to join his father at the party. What does the father do? The same thing he did for his younger son. He humiliates himself by leaving the party and going out to his older son. No, in the same way as the father in this story, God's love is constant and is patient and is welcoming. He will search for us and he'll give us opportunities to respond, but he will not force us to come to him. Like the father in this story, God waits patiently for us to come to our senses. So will you come home? Will you let him love you? Will you be in close relationship with him? Will you acknowledge how much he loves you and respond to that love? Let's pray. Father, if we understand this story right, it's a description of the unbelievable way that you love us and your open-armed desire to have us enter your home and live with you. I know that there's some of us that want to come home today. Is there anybody that's watching right now that wants to come home to the arms of God? I want to pray for you. Lord, I lift up those that are watching this today. And God, I thank you for the fact that you love us like you do. That you run to us, that you open your arms for us, that you kiss us, that you give us your sandals and your rings. Glad that you throw a celebration, that there's a celebration going on in heaven when we come to you. But I just lift up anyone that's watching here today. And I just pray that you just do that work in their heart to draw them closer to you. Let's ask that they will be your child, that they will want to live their life for you. As we look at this story also, it's just an illustration about how much you long for those outside this building to come home to. And God, would you use us to invite and welcome people to join your family? Would you allow us to be examples in this community, at our workplace, in our neighborhoods, that we would invite people to come, that they would see you through us, and that they would invite you to come to our family, that would draw you because of the way they live their life. Just be with us as we go out here today. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Pastor David did a great job of reminding us of the love that God has for us. Maybe right now you need that love. And as he prayed, I'm asking that God would have done something in your life. If you have our connection card out, let us know what God did in your life this week. If you don't have one yet, text the word CONNECT to 660-885-2127. Let us know that God did something in your life. Maybe you would like to request the book Unshakable, or even the next step for your journey. We'd love to be able to send it. You can also request those books by just simply texting the word book to the same phone number. If you would, let us know if you'd like to have the digital copy, which you can read on your Kindle, e-reader, or even computer, or if maybe you would rather prefer the hard copy, and we'd be happy to send it to you free of charge. Don't forget, you can return your tithe and give your offering by texting the word give. You can also submit prayer requests anytime during the week by texting the word prayer. I want you to know we're glad that you were with us this week. If there's anything that we can do for you, we'd love to be able to come alongside and help to meet needs. I'll be looking forward to seeing you next week here at Allen Street Online. God bless.